After this, Paul left Athens and went to Corinth. There he found a Jew named Aquila, a native of Pontus, who had recently come from Italy with his wife Priscilla, because Claudius had ordered all Jews to leave Rome. Paul went to see them, and because he was of the same trade, he stayed with them, and they worked together. By trade, they were tent makers. Every Sabbath, he would argue in the synagogue and would try to convince Jews and Greeks. When Silas and Timothy arrived from Macedonia, Paul was occupied with proclaiming the word, testifying to the Jews that the Messiah was Jesus. When they opposed and reviled him in protest, he shook the dust from his clothes and said to them, "Your blood be on your own hands. I am innocent. From now on I will go to the Gentiles." Then he left the synagogue and went to the house of a man named Titius Justus, a worshiper of God. His house was next door to the synagogue. Crispus, the official of the synagogue, became a believer in the Lord, together with all his household. And many of the Corinthians who heard Paul became believers and were baptized. One night, the Lord said to Paul in a vision, "Do not be afraid, but speak and do not be silent. For I am with you, and no one will lay a hand on you to harm you. For there are many in this city who are my people." He stayed there 1 year and 6 months, teaching the word of God among them. Friends, this is the word of the Lord. Thanks be to God.
Before I start in with the sermon, I want to thank the choir because they put on a beautiful concert here yesterday. Thank you so much. And then they were still here this morning to make beautiful music, so we appreciate that greatly. So this week is the final week of our sermon series on hospitality. And this story from the book of Acts may not be quite as familiar to you as some of the other stories you hear from Acts. But Paul leaves Athens and heads to Corinth. Corinth had been destroyed by Rome in 144 BCE and then rebuilt in 44 BCE by Julius Caesar as a colony. So it was resettled by Romans, not by native Greeks. And that happened about 100 years before this story takes place. It's a new city, in other words, built by an occupying force and inhabited first by the occupiers. And it is on a strip of land that connects Greece to the Peloponnese Peninsula. This strip of land is also the closest point between two bodies of water. So it's a crossroads city in every sense of the word, either by water or by land. You go through Corinth. And if you've ever read Paul's letters to the church in Corinth, you might recall that there was a lot of conflict in the church in Corinth. There's a lot of disagreement about how to be church, how to get along with people who saw the world differently. Good thing we fixed all those problems, am I right? So Paul leaves Athens, heads to Corinth, about 50 miles away, and he meets Aquila and Priscilla. They are Turkish Jews who had already relocated to Rome and then had been forced to leave Rome because of Claudius, so they were refugees. Claudius, it says, kicked the Jews out of Rome, that's what it says in Acts, but the historical record suggests that he ordered the expulsion of Jews because they were following someone named Christus. Sounds a lot like maybe it was Christ, doesn't it? Jesus might have been causing all the trouble. So Claudius may have been trying to expel Christians, but he didn't get the nuance that not all Jews followed this Jesus guy. Many scholars think it wasn't actually about religion as much as it was an excuse to expel foreigners. Where have we seen that? Maybe today, deporting all Venezuelans for being gang members, when in fact, not all Venezuelans are gang members. Priscilla and Aquila will go on to become very important missionary leaders, taking the gospel to all sorts of places and supporting Paul's journeys. But it is not clear at the start of the story if they were Jews who had been expelled from Rome or followers of Jesus' Jews who had been expelled from Rome when Paul meets them. They are people who have been dislocated from their home because of an unstable Caesar and his executive orders. We're told Paul went to see them not because they shared the same faith, but because they had the same profession. Paul stayed with them and worked with them because they were tent makers. Today in the church, you often hear tent maker as a reference to a pastor who makes their living outside of the congregational context. So I am not a tent maker because you pay me a living wage and I don't have to work a second job. Thank you very much. But many people minister as Paul did, doing something else to pay the bills and then talking about Jesus on the side. But I'd like us to consider the idea that we are all tent makers, every one of us. Whether we identify as preachers, no matter who pays your salary, we are all called to be tent makers. Tents provide shelter to people who do not have a home. Tents are either for fun when you want to go camping or because you're a refugee and Claudius has kicked you out of Rome as a political stunt. Tents provide hospitality, shelter from the sun or from inclement weather. Even when Paul was not preaching, he was creating things for the world that provided shelter and welcome for people. And you don't have to be a preacher to be a tent maker. Each of us is called to create shelter for other people. And we do that because there are people who need shelter, literally. We also do it because there have been times when we were the people who received shelter and welcome from other people's tent making. I don't know this for sure, but I suspect that Priscilla and Aquila may not have had a dedicated guest wing in their home since they had recently fled Rome, and they still welcomed Paul in. I don't know about you, but this is a very helpful story for me, because I think sometimes I will be more hospitable when X, Y, or Z is in place, when I'm not so busy, when I have a bigger place, when the stars align and all is perfect in the world. But hospitality is what really gets us through the times when not all is right in the world. It's how we care for others when no matter whatever Claudius is in the White House and the world is disrupted. Many of you know Lucy Bone, a child of this congregation, now in high school. She turned in a project for school recently, which I'm sharing here with her permission. It's about Calvary. She quoted a TED Talk she had listened to, and she started with this: "Everyone wants a village, but nobody wants to be a villager." In her own words, she continues, "When I was starting this project, I wanted to document a community, and I immediately thought of the community that I am part of at my church. There, I'm surrounded by people I have known my whole life, people I could ask almost anything of, and they would give it to me without a second thought. A people and community that loves me no matter how much I neglect showing up regularly on Sundays." She said, "I think there generally is a growing lack of community in the world. It's difficult to find the drive to talk to strangers in public spaces when you know you have a phone, a device in your hand that can solve all issues of boredom without possibility of judgment or rejection. When we seek community, we seek a place for us to grow, socialize, receive help, and build relationships." I think Lucy is correct. We all want a village, although maybe some of us sometimes forget we need a village. But to do the work of being a villager, that's the challenge. Priscilla and Aquila did the work of being a villager for Paul because they provided shelter for him. They let him work alongside them as tent makers. And because of that, he was able to, quote, argue in the synagogue each week. Now, argue is a contentious word maybe for us in English, but in the Greek, it really is about an open exchange of ideas. Paul would make a case for Christianity each week in the synagogue, and if you read his letters, you know his rhetorical skills were very strong. But I suspect, though, that it was the community that Paul created that changed people's hearts as much as his words. He stayed there for 18 months, which is a long time in an itinerant minister's life. I think there are Christians who have taken the quote about Paul arguing as the point of this story. We see them today protesting against people and excluding people from faith, judging people who get it wrong. And that is a misreading of the Greek to start with. But more than that, it misses the call to be villagers for each other. If we're excluding and judging people and not welcoming them into our homes and lives and churches, we are missing the call to provide hospitality and to make the village we live in one that supports and cares for people. We've all seen stories on the news of ICE agents who are disappearing people from their asylum hearings around the country. It happened this week in our city, just a mile away. In addition to completely abandoning the rule of law, the sanctity of the courts and the judicial process, it also shows a complete disregard for any values we hold as Christians. This is not okay, and we cannot be silent while this continues. Also this week in San Diego, about 36 ICE agents showed up ready for battle in full tactical gear, faces hidden by masks, to arrest restaurant workers while people like you and I were peacefully dining in the restaurants. The federal agents, though, did not expect a resounding rejection by the neighbors and the patrons. The community spontaneously protested the agents. ICE discharged 3 flashbang grenades at diners in a restaurant to disperse the crowd. The people instead pushed ICE agents out of their community, forcing the vehicles to retreat. Think about what God came to Paul and said in the vision. Do not be afraid, but speak and do not be silent, for I am with you and no one will lay a hand on you to harm you. There are many in this city who are my people. We will not have a village at all if the government can take any of us off the street and send us to concentration camps in other countries. These diners showed us how to be villagers, how to be tent makers, how to stand with each other and offer shelter and safety in the face of absurd cruelty in hospitality. We must resist. Friday night, almost 1,000 people were in this sanctuary for a sold-out event to listen to the author Ocean Vuong talk about his new novel, The Emperor of Gladness. Ocean came to this country as a refugee from Vietnam. His grandfather was an American GI who had married his grandmother during the Vietnam War. But the grandfather had gone home to visit the US when Saigon fell, and he was unable to return to Vietnam. So Ocean's grandmother was worried that she and her 3 daughters, her half-American daughters, would be seen as collaborators. So she placed her daughters in separate orphanages, hoping that that would be their best chance to not be targets of violence in a country that had already received so much violence and did not know another way to respond. By the time the family was reunited many years later, Ocean's mother had given birth to him and was working in a salon when a police officer recognized her as someone who was of mixed race, which meant she should not have been allowed to have a job. The family fled the country for their safety and were eventually granted asylum here in the United States, which is where he grew up. He was a child of this country who was not always welcomed here in this country. In his conversation, though, Friday, he didn't talk about that. He talked about dignity and the importance of seeing dignity in every single person we encounter. And he didn't say this, but I suspect he learned the value of dignity because his own dignity has not always been recognized in either the country of his birth or in this country where he grew up. He reminded us that on the news, whether it's Fox News on one side or The Daily Show or Bill Maher on the other side, we traffic in humiliation, and we mistake that for critique. We act as if our political opponents are all rubes and idiots, and only we have the handle on the truth. He is now a professor teaching poetry, and he has had to teach his students to remove humiliation from their critiques of each other's work, because each of them, he teaches, deserves to be treated with dignity. He's been talking about the work of being a villager in this village called life. Hospitality is about seeing the dignity in other people, about being tent makers who offer shelter in a stormy world so that other people's light can be seen by other people. Let us be tent makers, one for another. Amen.